Mic check, 1, 2. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Garais, BIO112, Anatomy and Physiology 1. And this is the last lecture, chapter 13. And this is the lecture on hormones or the endocrine system. Well, focus on the endocrine system. So, let's see now. Okay, I have this down, this down. Let's see if we can bring up slideshow. Okay. So the endocrine system and the nervous system, they both share the same properties because they are both communication systems. The nervous system is fast and the endocrine system is a little bit slower. Nervous system requires both chemicals and electricity, the chemicals in the form of neurotransmitters and the electricity in the form of what we call an action potential. About the endocrine system deals solely endo, secretion within. Endo means within. Crine means to secrete the bloodstream. So it's going to take a little while longer. And their chemical system is a bunch of hormones that are secreted from glands. And here are some examples. Here's the picture of where the glands are. And some of them are located here at the part of your midbrain, hypothalamus, pituitary, and your pineal. Your gonads, if a female patient, ovaries, and in a male patient, testes. Now, differentiate endocrine from exocrine. Endo means internal secretion, so secretion inside, so into the bloodstream. And the hormones are the chemicals that get secreted. Exocrine glands are glands that secrete outwardly, and we already learned about the merocrine, apocrine, and holocrine gland. Now, other chemical messengers that kind of belong into the exocrine family are local messengers, not really considered hormones, but for our purposes, let's just call them hormones. We have paracrine secretions, which affect nearby cells, and autocrine secretions, which affect only the cells that secrete them. So this is nice to know, but this must know. We already talked about the differences between nervous system and endocrine system. So this slide number 6, very useful, very nice. Slide number 7, a little bit more. Same thing, but in picture form. Hormones and abbreviations. Now, hypothalamus, I want you to think of things that release things and things that inhibit things. So you have the corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormones, right? All releasing hormones, or we have the inhibitory hormones. The only exception is somatostatin. So somatostatin, secreted by the this gland, the hypothalamus, deals with shutting down growth hormone. So it's a growth hormone release inhibiting hormone. Hence the term somatostatin. Soma means body or growing your body, and statin means to stand still. You have the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary have a bunch of hormones that it releases, but the posterior pituitary only have 2. The posterior pituitary gland releases the antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. ADH tells your kidneys, "Hey, keep in the urine. I'm dehydrated or I need that water." And oxytocin tells the uterus, especially during pregnancy, not only pregnancy but during delivery, that to contract so that the baby can be, so that the pushing or the contraction of the uterine musculature, which is the middle layer of the uterus, can help push baby out. And those are the 2 in the posterior pituitary. But if you look at the list in the anterior pituitary, there's a whole bunch more. And the pituitary is known as the master gland because you can see that it releases a whole bunch of glands in both the anterior portion and the posterior portion. Now let's look at the anterior pituitary gland. That's ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. It's coming from it aids in cortisol release, which is from your adrenal gland or the gland above your kidneys. FSH and LH deal with ovulation release in the female patient and sperm production in the male patient. Growth hormone, of course, is growth hormone. It'll act on bone, fat, and muscle so that you can grow. And the growth hormone is the exact opposite of somatostatin. Somatostatin in the hypothalamus tells your body, hey, stop growing. Don't need energy for growth. But growth hormone says, hey, let's get some energy because I need to grow. And growth hormone works particularly when you're asleep and when you get rest, especially during REM sleep. Prolactin, pro meaning, promotion of, or, pro, like if you're, pro whatever, pro no testing. So you love no testing or no tests or no exams. So that's prolactin. And prolactin is promotion of lactation or milk from the mammary glands. Now, your thyroid deals with metabolism. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but this is your TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's in your anterior pituitary gland. Thyroid gland, calcitonin, deals with calcium balance. T3 and T4, known as thyroxine and triiodothyroxine, it's just better to know them as T3, T4. They're part of the glands that help you in metabolism. So your thyroid, when we ramp it up, increase TSH, increase T3, increase T4, we increase metabolism. And remember, metabolism is the sum of all catabolism and anabolism reactions. And you need energy to do it. So, of course, calcitonin is put in there in the mix because calcitonin deals with um, calcium levels. And we know that calcium turns things on, hence metabolism. Parathyroid hormone also deals with calcitonin. We're going to talk more about that momentarily. Your adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex, right? You have a medullary area and a cortical area of your adrenal glands. The medullary area deals with epinephrine and norepinephrine. We already know norepinephrine has a neurotransmitter in smooth, also known as visceral muscle. And of course, epinephrine, when you're under stress, but acute stress, like someone's trying to hit you with a car, you see the car coming, you need epinephrine to mobilize your glucose, get more oxygen into your system so you can deal with, excuse me, fight or flight. Aldosterone and cortisol, we already talked about aldosterone in the RAA system, or maybe we didn't yet. Well, we will be talking about it. So that's the RAA, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Aldosterone has to do with salt concentration. So if I want to bring up my blood pressure in the RAA system, I will increase my aldosterone, therefore increase sodium absorption in the kidney. Now, wherever salt goes or sodium goes, water will go, and then your blood pressure should go up. And cortisol, we talked about epinephrine being the thing that jumpstarts your heart when you're about acutely or really fast, right? Or a really short period of time. That's what acute means. The epinephrine can do that, but it is the cortisol will do, which responds to over chronic amounts of stress. And the thing about cortisol is it helps mitigate our stress, helps us deal with it. But the bad thing about cortisol is that in the process, it will lower your immune system. Okay, right? Oh, I gotta ask. Let me answer this email. Sorry for the interruption. All right. So we come here. Cortisol, I want you to think of chronic stress. Chronic stress will decrease your immune system, decrease your inflammatory process, and could potentially make you sick. Epinephrine is only for acute. That'll increase your heart rate, increase your respiratory rate for your fight or flight, and that will help you deal with something acute stress, like you know, almost being run over by a car. So let's take a moment and talk about pancreas, your pancreas, which is glucagon and insulin. Insulin gets released after you've taken a big meal. The function of insulin is to open up the doors in the cell so that the glucose can go in. The function of glucagon, when you're in a starvation state or on your way to a starvation state, let's say you haven't eaten for about anywhere from 10 to 14 hours or so, right? The glucagon will tell your liver to open up all the sugar stores and then release it into the blood so your body can have some sugar. So think insulin when I ate a big meal. Think glucagon when you are, uh, you know, when you're in a haven't eaten for a while, but in a little starvation state. We also know about somatostatin that will the pancreas will also release somatostatin to tell your body stop growing when it feels it's grown enough. Okay, so we know hormones. They're chemicals and they get released into their blood and they have certain chemical properties. Some of them are water soluble, some of them are lipid or fat soluble. Steroids, non-steroid hormones, not too important for our exam because, just because I said so. How's that? This as well is the chemistry of hormones. Don't need to know that. But if you look here, and I mentioned it in class, do you see how amino acids, which form proteins, and then you have carbohydrates and fats, lipids, which is cholesterol. If you look at this, you need all three: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So you can't have any diet that ignores one of those three integral items, because now you can see that that's what we make hormones out of. We make them out of all three things: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So you can't cut any one out. If I need more receptors, it's called upregulation. Okay, so if I don't have enough hormone, you'll have more receptors, so that the strength of the response or the action that you need to happen, for example, like growth hormone, right? Don't have enough growth hormone, so what does your body do? It gets more growth hormone receptors, and that's called upregulation. Now, what if I have too much hormone? Well, I could downregulate and decrease the number of my receptors. Okay, so it's a way of kind of like maintaining homeostasis when there's too much of a hormone level or too little of a hormone level. Now, the control of hormonal secretions, right, is typically just like the control of homeostasis. It's done by negative feedback. And positive feedback is a rarity, but it is negative feedback that controls it. And there are three forms of negative feedback. Of course, one, homeostasis, that was always synonymous with the hypothalamus. Two, nervous system. Your nerves can actually directly stimulate glands. And last but not least, if I got too much glucose or too much of a certain ion in my body, because the amount of chemicals of certain chemicals like ions like calcium, potassium, those changing levels will either stimulate or increase or inhibit or decrease certain hormones. And it makes sense. And we kind of talked about it because we know that the amount of sugar in your bloodstream, right? Whether you've eaten or if you're on your way to starving, is dictated by the amount of glucose, amount of this chemical that's floating around. Okay, so that's changes in composition of internal environment. Now, positive feedback is a rarity, but it's usually in the reproductive system. The main control is negative feedback, and here are three methods. This is slide number 17. It's pretty good. Now, pituitary gland, all the really important things are in your base of your brain, the stuff that you don't want really damaged. So, what's it good for? Well, your pituitary gland, typically when you're in development in your mother's uterus, there's something called melanocyte stimulating hormone, so which starts melanin production. So I want you to associate the pituitary gland with melanin and which UV radiation protection. Hypothalamus, we already know as the control center, releasing hormones, inhibitory hormones. And let's look at these major anterior pituitary hormones, but actually we don't really have to look at them because we kind of already did them. Now, on slide number 23, this is a really neat slide that you have here, where if you could see all the stuff in the hypothalamus, and then it activates other things in where? The anterior pituitary. And then your target muscle here. Doesn't this look like a beautiful multiple choice section for an exam? I could ask you, if I stimulate growth hormone, what will grow? Bone, muscle, adipose tissue. If I stimulate somatostatin, it'll do what? Inhibit growth hormone. So what will happen to the growth of bone, muscle, and adipose tissue? It will decrease. Because I have prolactin. If I had prolactin, what will it do? It'll stimulate the mammary gland. But if I had prolactin inhibiting hormone, what will it do? It'll tell the mammary gland, hey, stop making milk. You don't need it no more or anymore. Gosh, look at my grammar. I'm supposed to be a teacher. Thyrotropin releasing hormone. Of course, your thyroid deals with metabolism. TSH increases T3, T4, and then will increase thyroid activity. CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, affects ACTH. ACTH, if you look here, the adrenal cortex, it even looks like an A. So adrenal cortex, ACTH, increase of cortisol. Oopsies, LH and FSH. LH and FSH in the ovaries stimulate ovulation or release of that single egg every month on the patient's menstrual cycle. But in the testes, FSH and LH stimulate sperm production. And it makes sense. If this patient here is releasing ovaries, this patient here has a lot of sperm, guess what? They get together and propagate the species. I mentioned antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. This is posterior pituitary. Thyroid gland, I mentioned T3, T4. Just call them T3, T4. It's easy. And calcitonin. Calcitonin is what? Messes with the calcium levels. So it'll lower blood calcium and it'll lower phosphate ion. T3, T4 increases the rate of energy, increases metabolism. We will not be discussing pathology, so the disorders are out. Parathyroid gland, we already talked about regulation of calcium and of course phosphate, because calcium and this phosphorus here are the two main reasons why bones are not brittle and they're strong, because of these minerals. But these minerals, if osteoclasts act on the bone, these minerals will be released in your bloodstream. So the actions of parathyroid hormone is the exact opposite of calcitonin. Calcitonin will lower your blood calcium level. Well, parathyroid hormone will increase it. And remember the drawing that I had on the board last night. I drew a bone, I drew a kidney, and the other one in the middle was a small intestines. So your bones will release calcium due to parathyroid hormone. Your intestines will increase absorption of your calcium. And lastly, your kidneys will prevent calcium from being put into the urine. So it'll reabsorb it. So think of those three things and think of the thing that I drew on the board to help you remember your actions of parathyroid hormone. Here, and this is your parathyroid. Let's look at this. Intestinal enzymes makes provitamin D, right? Ultraviolet rays, then what happens? Exposure of the skin to ultraviolet radiation or the sun, you'll get vitamin D, also known as cholecalciferol. It goes in the liver, goes in the kidney, and then what? Then it can also control the small intestine regarding calcium. It'll release the calcium. Adrenal glands, we went over that, aldosterone. Okay, a lovely picture of your pancreas, the head of the pancreas, and then the tail. If you'll also notice, if you look at the pancreatic cells, they look kind of cuboidal, don't they? And we mentioned that glandular products are cuboidal because they store and hold hormones until it's time to be used. So this is yet another case of morphology equals physiology. Morphology equals anatomy, and all of them are related. We talked about glucagon, insulin, and somatostatin already. Pineal gland, we already talked about melatonin, and also the added reason is the pineal gland also regulates your circadian rhythm, which is your day and night cycle. And we talked about that if you get jet lagged, or fly on the other side of the world, you're going to be a little bit off. Your day and night cycle is going to be off. That day and night cycle is called your circadian rhythm. Thymus gland, that develops T cells. We already learned that. And there's some other glands. Ovaries make estrogen. Testes make, of course, um, sperm. We already talked about the effects of stress. Okay. Remember, acute stress, like somebody jump scared you, or a car is coming your way and is about to hit you. Then it will release epinephrine. What happens? Your pupils get dilated, blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up. Therefore, you can run or fight your way out of danger. Hence the term fight or flight. But if the stressor is prolonged or chronic, ick pertaining to chronis, which is time. So a chronic patient is going to have a lot of problems because then the cortisol will start kicking in from the ACTH, from your adrenal gland, and then what will happen? Decrease in antibodies, decrease in white blood count, and of course, increase in potential to get sick from an infection. That's why look at your patient holistically as a whole. Holistically is spelled HOLISTIC, but it means to look at all the aspects of your patient, not only mental, not only physical, social, all the nuances of your patient. They're not only a diagnosis, they're a human being. And human beings are 3, 4, 5-dimensional at best. Now, responses to stress, we talked about the alarm stage, fight or flight. It's immediate. Increased blood glucose, right? Heart rate, breathing rate, everything's going to be what? Ramped up. Then resistance stage, you're going to try to get used to it. And then last but not least, the exhausted stage. There's only so much your body can handle. That's why cortisol kicks in when you've been sick or hurt, for more than a day. Okay. So that is the lecture. Thank you very much for hanging out, and I'll see you in class. Ugh, sleepy. How do I end this? You in our lovely library.